Imagine a quiet Iowa night shattered by the screech of skateboard wheels, a teenage boy, eyes blazing with defiance, tearing away from the only home he's ever known. Welcome to Heartfelt Tales, where we don't just spin stories, we rip open the raw, jagged edges of human struggle and stitch them back with threads of redemption. I'm your guide, peeling back the layers of heartbreak and hope to deliver tales that hit hard and linger long. Today, we're diving into The Prodigal Road Home, a 5-part odyssey of Jake Miller, a 14-year-old rebel who spits in the face of his parents' love and bolts into a world that chews him up and spits him out. Hunger, betrayal, desperation, this kid's about to learn the hard way what Ephesians 6 verses 1-2 means, honor your father and mother. This video's loaded, every minute packed with twists, tears, and a truth that could change everything. Don't skip a second, watch it all to catch the full gut punch of Jake's journey. If this grabs you, slam that like button, drop a comment, ever run from home yourself, and subscribe with the bell on, because Heartfelt Tales is where stories bleed real. Let's roll. Jake's road starts now, and it's a rough one. Hashtag Part 1, The Defiance Spark. The sun was barely up in Cedar Grove, Iowa, casting a pale glow over the sleepy town's clapboard houses and gravel driveways. At 112 Maple Lane, the Miller house buzzed with its usual morning chaos, pots clanging in the kitchen, a radio humming country tunes, and the faint thud of a skateboard hitting the porch steps. Jake Miller, 14 and wiry, with a mop of brown hair that hadn't seen a comb in weeks, stood in the doorway, his hazel eyes narrowed at the scene inside. His mom, Lisa, a petite woman with tired lines around her gentle face, stirred oatmeal at the stove, her nurse's scrubs already on for the early shift. His dad, Tom, a bear of a man with grease-stained hands and a mechanic's gruff voice, sat at the table, sipping coffee over yesterday's paper. It was a home, warm, cluttered, lived in, but to Jake, it felt more like a cage every day. "Jake, honey, can you clean your room before school?" Lisa called over her shoulder, her tone soft but firm. "It's a mess again." Jake dropped his backpack with a thud, kicking it against the wall. "I'm not a baby, Mom. I'll do it later." His voice carried that teenage edge, half whine, half defiance, like he was testing how far he could push. Tom looked up, his bushy brows knitting together. "Later's not good enough, kid. You've been saying that all week. Get it done." Jake crossed his arms, his skateboard dangling from one hand. "Why does it even matter? It's my room. You don't have to live in it." "Because we said so," Tom shot back, setting his mug down hard enough to slosh coffee onto the table. "You live under our roof, you follow our rules. End of story." Lisa turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes pleading. "Jake, it's not about the room. It's about helping out. We're a family, we work together." Jake snorted, rolling his eyes so hard it looked painful. "Yeah, right. You just want me to be your little robot, chores, school, church. I'm sick of it." He spun on his heel, aiming for the stairs, but Tom's voice stopped him cold. "Don't walk away when we're talking to you," Tom said, standing now, his broad frame filling the kitchen doorway. "You're grounded. No skating with those buddies of yours till you shape up." That was the match to the gasoline. Jake whirled around, his face flushing red. "You don't get me. You never do. I'm done with this crap." He grabbed his backpack, shoving past Tom, who reached out but missed. Lisa stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Jake, wait, please. The Bible says, 'Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right.' It's not weakness to honor us, it's what's good for you." Jake froze at the bottom of the stairs, his hand gripping the banister. He hated when she pulled the Bible card, those verses she'd whisper at bedtime when he was little, the ones plastered on the fridge in her neat handwriting. Ephesians 6:1-2. He'd heard it a million times, obey, honor, blah blah blah. "I don't care what your book says," he snapped, not looking back. You can't control me forever. He bolted upstairs, the door to his room slamming shut like a gunshot. The house fell quiet, save for the tick of the clock and the faint sizzle of oatmeal burning on the stove. Lisa sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. He's pulling away, Tom. I don't know how to reach him. Tom ran a hand through his thinning hair, his jaw tight. He's 14. Boys get like this. We just gotta hold the line, he'll come around. But Jake wasn't coming around, not today. Upstairs, he paced his room, a tornado of dirty clothes, comic books, and skateboard stickers. The walls felt like they were closing in, every rule a chain he couldn't break. No skating. Grounded. They didn't get it, he wasn't their little kid anymore, the one who'd sit still for church or nod at their lectures. He had friends now, guys like Max and Cody who didn't answer to anyone, who stayed out late and lived free. That's what he wanted, freedom, not this suffocating box of, yes, sir, and, no, ma'am. He stopped pacing, his eyes landing on the window. It faced the backyard, a straight shot to the alley where he could skate away unseen. His heart thudded, a mix of fear and thrill. They'd never let him go, not Tom with his iron grip, not Lisa with her guilt trips. But he could take it for himself. He grabbed his backpack, stuffing it with essentials, a hoodie, a half-empty bag of chips, his beat-up phone, a few bucks from his piggy bank. The skateboard went under his arm, his ticket out. Downstairs, Lisa had gone back to the stove, scraping burnt oatmeal into the sink, while Tom flipped through the paper, muttering about oil prices. Neither heard the creak of the window sliding open, the rustle of Jake climbing onto the roof of the shed below. He paused there, crouched in the gray dawn, the cool air biting his cheeks. Cedar Grove stretched out before him, quiet streets, flickering porch lights, the hum of a distant train. Home was behind him, but it didn't feel like home anymore, just a place that wanted to hold him down. They'll see, he whispered, his breath fogging in the chill. I don't need them. I'll be fine. He dropped to the grass, silent as a shadow, and rolled his skateboard onto the pavement. The wheels hummed against the asphalt, carrying him down the alley, past the neighbor's barking dog, past the corner store where he'd buy candy with Tom's spare change. He didn't look back, not once, as the house on Maple Lane shrank into the distance, swallowed by the morning mist. By the time Lisa knocked on his door an hour later, tray of oatmeal in hand, he was gone. Jake, she called, her voice soft at first, then sharp with panic. The room was empty, bed unmade, window open, a cold breeze rustling the curtains. She dropped the tray, the bowl shattering on the floor, and ran downstairs. Tom. He's not here. Tom bolted up, the paper crumpling in his fists. What do you mean, not here? They searched the house, closets, basement, garage, then the yard, calling his name until their voices cracked. Lisa sank onto the porch steps, her hands trembling, while Tom kicked the shed in frustration, splintering the wood. Damn it, Jake, he growled, but his eyes were wet, fear creeping in where anger had been. Lisa clutched her phone, dialing Jake's number. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Jake, honey, come home, she pleaded, her voice breaking. We love you. Please. She hung up, staring at the empty street, a verse echoing in her mind, honor your father and mother. She'd taught it to him since he could talk, hoping it'd root him deep. But now he was out there, alone, angry, running from the very love she'd tried to give. Tom put an arm around her, his gruffness softening. We'll find him, Lise. He's just blowing off steam. But his grip tightened, and they both knew it wasn't that simple. Jake wasn't just blowing off steam, he was breaking away, and the road he'd chosen was darker than either of them could see. Out on the edge of town, Jake slowed his board, the adrenaline fading as the sun climbed higher. His stomach growled, his legs ached, but his jaw stayed set. He'd show them, Tom, Lisa, the whole stupid world. He didn't need their rules, their roof, their Bible quotes. He was free now, or so he thought, skating past the last stop sign, the open field stretching ahead like a promise. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet feel, was how heavy freedom could be when you carried it alone. ### Part 2, The First Fall, Hunger and Cold. The sun climbed higher over Cedar Grove, painting the Iowa sky a watery blue, but Jake Miller barely noticed. His skateboard wheels buzzed against the cracked pavement as he rolled past the town limits, the last familiar landmarks, the rusted water tower, the faded Dairy Queen sign, fading into the rear view of his mind. Freedom tasted sharp and wild, like the wind whipping through his hoodie, tugging at the defiance still burning in his chest. He'd done it, left Tom and Lisa behind, their rules, their lectures, their suffocating love. "I don't need them," he muttered, kicking the board harder, the rhythm of his escape drowning out the quiet ache starting to gnaw at his gut. By mid-morning, he'd hit the outskirts, a stretch of county road flanked by cornfields, the stalks brown and brittle from an early spring frost. His phone buzzed in his pocket, Lisa's name flashing on the screen. He yanked it out, thumb hovering over the decline button, her voice from earlier echoing in his head, *, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. *, he snorted, shutting it off completely. "Not today, Mom." He stuffed the phone back in his jeans, ignoring the pang that came with it, her soft eyes, the way she'd hug him even when he pushed her away. No. He was done. With that. Max or Cody would text back soon, let him crash at their place. He just had to keep moving. But the moving got harder as the hours dragged on. The adrenaline that fueled his midnight getaway was burning out, replaced by a hollow growl in his stomach. He'd wolfed down the chips from his backpack an hour ago, crumbs sticking to his fingers, and now there was nothing left but a stale granola bar he'd forgotten about until he dug it out. He tore into it, the dry oats sticking to his throat, and washed it down with a swig from a half-empty water bottle he'd nabbed from home. Plenty to get by, he told himself, but the math didn't add up, $3 in his pocket, no food, no plan. The sky shifted by noon, clouds rolling in thick and gray, a damp chill settling over the fields. Jake slowed his board, his legs wobbly from hours of skating, his breath puffing out in little clouds. He'd made it to a gas station just off Route 30, a squat, grimy building with flickering fluorescent lights and a single pump. His stomach twisted, louder now, and he figured he could stretch his cash for a candy bar, maybe a soda. He propped his skateboard against the wall and shuffled inside, the bell above the door jangling. The clerk, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a faded tattoo peeking from his sleeve, barely glanced up from his phone. Jake grabbed a Snickers and a Coke, sliding his crumpled bills across the counter. "That's $3.50, the clerk grunted, not looking up. Jake froze, patting his pockets like more money might magically appear. I've only got $3, he mumbled, his face heating up. "Then put something back," the clerk snapped, finally eyeing him, a skinny kid in a soaked hoodie, sneakers muddy from the road. Jake hesitated, then slid the Coke back, clutching the Snickers like a lifeline. He stepped outside, tearing into it, the chocolate melting sticky on his fingers. It was gone in 3 bites, and the hunger stayed, sharper now, mocking him. That's when the rain started, a cold, spitting drizzle that turned to a steady downpour in minutes. Jake cursed under his breath, yanking his hood up, but it didn't help. The thin fabric soaked through fast, water trickling down his neck, his jeans clinging to his legs. He grabbed his skateboard and ducked under the gas station's awning, pressing against the brick wall as the wind howled, slashing rain sideways. His teeth chattered, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, but the chill sank into his bones anyway. He sat there, knees pulled to his chest, watching cars splash by on the highway, families in minivans, truckers in big rigs, people with places to go. A memory flickered, Sunday mornings in the Miller's old Ford, Tom grumbling about traffic, Lisa humming hymns, the heater blasting warm air while Jake sulked in the back. He shook his head, shoving it down. "They don't care," he muttered, his voice lost in the rain's drumbeat. "They're probably glad I'm gone." But the thought didn't stick. He saw Lisa's face, those worried lines deepening when he'd skip dinner, the way she'd leave a plate out anyway. Tom's too, gruff and loud, sure, but he'd spent hours teaching Jake to ollie on that skateboard, cheering when he landed it. Jake hugged himself tighter, the cold biting harder. "I can handle this," he said, louder now, like he needed to convince the empty lot. "I don't need their stupid house or their stupid rules." The rain didn't care about his bravado. It pounded the awning, dripping through a crack to splatter his sneakers. His fingers numb, he fumbled for his phone, turning it back on. 3 missed calls from Lisa, 2 from Tom, a string of texts, "Where are you? Come home, please. We're worried, Jake." He stared at the screen, his thumb brushing the call button, then locked it again, shoving it away. "Not yet," he growled. "I'm not crawling back." Hours bled into dusk, the sky darkening to a bruised purple. The clerk stepped out, lighting a cigarette, and glared at Jake. "No loitering, kid. Buy something or beat it." Jake stood, stiff and shivering, grabbing his board. "Fine," he spat, stepping into the downpour. The clerk didn't watch him go, just flicked ash into a puddle and went back inside. Jake skated on, the road slick and treacherous, his wheels skidding on wet gravel. His hoodie hung heavy, water streaming down his face, blurring his vision. He didn't know where he was going, just away, anywhere but back. The field stretched endless on either side, no houses, no lights, just the hiss of rain and the thud of his heartbeat. His stomach cramped, empty now, the Snickers a distant memory. His legs burned, each push weaker than the last, but he kept moving, fueled by a stubborn spark he couldn't name. He stopped under a rusted overpass, the concrete dripping overhead, offering shaky shelter. He sank to the ground, his back against the wall, skateboard across his lap. The cold was relentless, seeping through his clothes, his breath shallow and ragged. He pulled his knees up, burying his face in his arms, the rain's roar filling his ears. "I'm fine," he whispered, but it sounded like a lie even to him. Another memory slipped in, last winter, a snowstorm knocking out the power. Tom had dragged the old camping stove into the living room, Lisa piling blankets on Jake while they ate canned soup by flashlight. He'd complained then, too, about the cold, the dark, but they'd been there, solid and warm, laughing at his grumbling. Now, under this overpass, alone and soaked, that warmth felt a million miles away. He dug out his phone again, the battery low, the screen glowing faint. Lisa's last text stared back, "We love you, Jake. Please come home." His chest tightened, a lump rising in his throat. He could call, end this right now, hear her voice, let Tom's truck rumble up to get him. But pride clamped down hard. "No," he said, shoving the phone into his bag. "They'll think they won. I'm not weak." The night deepened, the rain a steady curtain around him. He curled tighter, his body shaking, hunger clawing at his insides. Freedom wasn't supposed to feel like this, empty, cold, lost. He closed his eyes, willing sleep to come, but all he saw was Maple Lane, the porch light Lisa always left on, the garage where Tom's tools clinked, the room he'd left behind. For the first time since he'd climbed out that window, doubt flickered, small but sharp. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe. Out on Route 30, a truck rumbled past, its headlights slicing through the dark, illuminating Jake for a fleeting second, a boy alone, defiant but fraying, his first fall bruising more than his pride. The road stretched ahead, unforgiving, and he didn't know yet how much harder it would get. Part 3, the second fall, betrayal and fear. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by morning, leaving the Iowa countryside slick and glistening under a dull gray sky. Jake Miller woke stiff and sore under the overpass on Route 30, his hoodie still damp, his skateboard scuffed from the night's ordeal. His stomach growled louder than ever, a hollow ache that matched the heaviness in his chest. He'd made it through the cold, the hunger, but the spark of defiance that fueled his escape was flickering now, dimmed by exhaustion. Still, he hauled himself up, brushing gravel from his jeans, and muttered, "I'm not going back. Not yet. Not until he proved he could make it on his own." He checked his phone, battery at 10%, 5 more missed calls from Lisa, a text from Tom, "call us, Jake. Now." He shoved it back in his pocket, ignoring the twist in his gut. They didn't get it, he wasn't their little boy anymore, tethered to their rules. "Honor your father and mother," Lisa's voice whispered in his head, but he shook it off, kicking his skateboard onto the wet pavement. Max or Cody hadn't texted back, but there was another option, Des Moines. 50 miles away, a real city, not some sleepy nowhere like Cedar Grove. He'd find someone there, crash somewhere, figure it out. Freedom was still his, even if it felt heavier than he'd expected. A pickup truck rumbled by, slowing as it passed. Jake stuck out his thumb, heart thudding, first time hitching, but he'd seen it in movies. The driver, a grizzled guy in a flannel shirt, rolled down the window. "Where you headed, kid?" he asked, eyeing Jake's soaked clothes. "Des Moines," Jake said, trying to sound older, tougher. The guy grunted, jerking his head toward the passenger seat. "Hop in. I'm going that way." The ride was quiet, the truck's heater blasting stale air, the radio crackling with static. Jake stared out the window, cornfields giving way to strip malls and gas stations as they neared the city. The driver dropped him off at a rundown skate park on the west side, chipped ramps, graffiti-smeared benches, a chain-link fence sagging under its own weight. "Stay out of trouble," the guy said, pulling away. Jake nodded, but trouble was already calling. A group of teens lounged near the half-pipe, older than him, maybe 16 or 17, with hoodies and snapbacks, cigarettes dangling from their lips. One of them, a lanky kid with a buzz cut and a silver chain, spotted Jake and waved him over. "You skate?" he asked, blowing smoke. "Yeah," Jake said, gripping his board tighter. "I'm Jake." "Rico," the kid replied, grinning. "These are my boys, Dax, Trey." The others nodded, sizing him up. Rico flicked his cigarette butt away. "You from around here?" "Nah, just passing through," Jake said, keeping it vague. Rico's grin widened. "Cool. Stick with us, man. We got a spot, you can crash if you want." Jake's pulse quickened. This was it, people who got him, who didn't care about curfews or chores. He nodded, falling in with them as they grabbed their boards and rolled out. The spot was a squat brick apartment a few blocks away, wedged between a pawn shop and a liquor store. Inside, it reeked of stale beer and weed, the floor littered with empty cans and pizza boxes. A stained couch sagged in the corner, a busted TV flickered with no sound, and a couple of guys Jake didn't know sprawled out, passing a joint. Rico flopped onto the couch, kicking his feet up. "Make yourself at home, bro. You're one of us now." Jake hesitated, the grime and chaos a far cry from Maple Lane's tidy kitchen, but he shrugged it off. This was freedom, raw, messy, his. He dropped his backpack by the door, joining them on the floor. Dax tossed him a warm beer. "Drink up," he said, smirking. Jake popped it open, taking a sip, bitter and sour, nothing like the root beer Lisa stocked at home. He forced it down, hiding a grimace, and they laughed, clapping him on the back. For a few hours, it worked. They swapped stories, Rico bragging about tagging a cop car, Trey showing off a scar from a fight. Jake spun a half-truth about running from some crap at home, and they nodded like it was normal. His stomach still ached, but the beer dulled it, and the noise drowned out the quiet doubts creeping in. Maybe this was where he belonged, no Tom barking orders, no Lisa quoting scripture. Just him and the crew. But the vibe shifted when night fell. Rico sat up, cracking his knuckles. "Yo, Jake, you got anything to pitch in? Food, cash, whatever." His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. Jake fumbled in his pockets, pulling out his last crumpled dollar. "This is all I've got," he said, uneasy. Rico snatched it, snorting. "That's it? Man, you're gonna have to earn your keep." He stood, nodding to Dax and Trey. "Let's hit the corner store." "Jake, you're with us." The hit wasn't shopping. Outside the dimly lit convenience store, Rico laid it out: you go in, grab some stuff, chips, smokes, whatever, and walk out. Easy. We've done it 100 times. Jake's stomach dropped, his mouth dry. Stealing. He'd swiped a candy bar once on a dare, but this was different: cameras, clerks, real trouble. "I dunno, man," he started, but Rico cut him off, stepping close. "You wanna crash with us or not? Prove you're in, or you're out." Dax and Trey smirked, crossing their arms. Jake's heart raced, his palms sweaty. He didn't want this, but he didn't want to be alone again either: cold, hungry, lost. He nodded, swallowing hard. Inside, the store buzzed with fluorescent light, the clerk, a bald guy with a bored stare, flipping through a magazine. Jake's hands shook as he grabbed a bag of Doritos and a pack of Marlboros, stuffing them under his hoodie. His pulse hammered, every step toward the door screaming run. He made it outside, Rico grinning, then Dax laughed, loud and sharp. "Nice one, kid. Now hand it over." Jake pulled the stuff out, but Rico's grin faded. "Nah, man, you're bored too. Call it rent." He grabbed Jake's skateboard, the one Tom had bought him 2 summers ago, the one he'd scratched his initials into. Jake lunged for it. "No way, that's mine," he yelled, but Trey shoved him back, hard. He stumbled, hitting the pavement, his elbow scraping raw. "You're out, little bitch," Rico sneered, tossing the Doritos at Jake's feet. "Take your chips and bounce." They laughed, skating off into the dark, Jake's board rolling away with them. He sat there, stunned, the bag crumpled beside him. His chest heaved, anger boiling into something hotter: betrayal. They'd used him, played him, and now he had nothing: no food, no ride, no one. The city loomed around him, streetlights buzzing, cars roaring past. He grabbed the chips, tearing them open, shoving handfuls into his mouth, but they tasted like ash. His elbow stung, his pride stung more, and then the fear hit. Night swallowed Des Moines, the air thick with exhaust and distant sirens. Jake picked himself up, hobbling down the block, his backpack heavier now without his board. The apartment was gone, Rico's crew was gone, and he was alone in a maze of concrete and shadows. He ducked into an alley, the wind cutting through his hoodie, the damp still clinging from yesterday's rain. Voices echoed, rough, slurred, and he pressed against a dumpster, its stink choking him. Footsteps shuffled nearby, a bottle shattering against a wall. His breath hitched, his body tense, every sound a threat. He slid to the ground, curling up behind the dumpster, his knees to his chest. "I should have stayed," he whispered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Home flashed in his mind: Tom's garage, oil-stained and loud, Lisa's soft voice reading bedtime stories when he was 6. "Honor your father and mother." He'd hated that verse, hated the weight of it, but now, shivering in this alley, it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like a rope he'd cut, leaving him to fall. His phone was dead now, no way to call, no way out. He hugged himself tighter, the fear sinking deep, fear of the dark, the city, the emptiness. Rico's laugh rang in his ears, the shove replaying in his bruised elbow. He'd trusted them, thought they'd be his ticket, but they'd stripped him bare. Freedom wasn't this, not betrayal, not hiding like a scared animal. Tears pricked his eyes, hot and angry, but he blinked them back. "I'm not done," he growled, clinging to the last shred of his defiance. Out in the alley, a rat scurried past, headlights flared and faded, and Jake sat, a small figure swallowed by the night. His second fall had landed harder, cracking the shell he'd built, and the road ahead loomed darker still. Part 4, the third fall, desperation and rescue. The alley in Des Moines was a cold, stinking tomb as dawn broke, gray light seeping through the cracks between buildings. Jake Miller hadn't slept, his eyes burned, his body ached, curled behind the dumpster where he'd spent the night. The betrayal from Rico and his crew still stung, a raw wound layered over the hunger and cold that had dogged him since he'd left Cedar Grove 3 days ago. His skateboard was gone, his phone was dead, his last dollar snatched by the same hands that had pushed him down. Freedom, once a blazing fire in his chest, was ash now, and Jake was a shadow of the boy who'd climbed out his window, Defiance crumbling under the weight of reality. He stood, joints popping, his breath shallow in the damp air. His hoodie hung heavy, soaked from the drizzle that hadn't quit, his jeans stiff with mud and grime. Hunger clawed at him, sharper than ever, no chips, no granola bar, just an empty pit that made his head swim. He slung his backpack over one shoulder, the straps digging into his skin, and shuffled out of the alley, blinking against the weak sunlight. Des Moines buzzed around him, cars honking, people hustling to work, but he was invisible, a ghost drifting through a world that didn't care. He didn't know where to go. Rico's spot was a dead end, his friends back home hadn't answered, and the city felt like a trap tightening around him. His legs moved anyway, carrying him west along a cracked sidewalk, past pawn shops and payday loan joints, until the buildings thinned into a sprawling truck stop off I-80. Diesel fumes hung thick, rigs idling in rows, their engines rumbling like a low growl. Jake's stomach twisted at the smell of fried food wafting from the diner attached, a greasy spoon with neon signs flashing open 24/7. He had nothing to spend, but maybe he could beg, scrounge, anything to stop the gnawing. He lingered by the entrance, watching truckers in ball caps shuffle in and out, their boots scuffing the pavement. His pride screamed against it, Millers don't beg asterisk, Tom's voice echoed, but hunger won. He stepped up to a burly guy in a denim jacket, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Hey, got any spare change? He mumbled, eyes on the ground. The trucker barely broke stride, brushing past with a grunt. Get lost, kid. Jake tried again, a woman with a tired face hauling a duffel bag. Please, just a buck. She shook her head, hurrying away. The third was worse, a hulking guy with a beard like steel wool, who stopped, glared, and shoved Jake hard. Get a job, punk, he snarled, sending Jake stumbling into a bench. He caught himself, his elbow throbbing where it had hit the metal armrest, humiliation burning hotter than the pain. He sank onto the bench, head in his hands, the world blurring as tears broke free. They rolled down his dirt-streaked face, hot and unstoppable, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. I can't do this, he choked out, the words barely audible over the hum of the truck stop. I can't, I'm done. 3 days out, and he was nothing, starving, broke, alone. The boy who'd stormed out of Maple Lane was gone, stripped bare by a road he'd thought would save him. He didn't hear the footsteps at first, didn't see the shadow fall across the bench until a voice cut through his haze. You okay, son? It was low, steady, rough around the edges but warm. Jake looked up, wiping his face fast, and saw an older man standing there, maybe 60, with a weathered face under a trucker's cap, gray hair poking out, eyes kind but sharp. He carried a paper bag, grease spotting the bottom, and a styrofoam cup steaming with coffee. Jake straightened, sniffling, trying to pull himself together. I'm fine, he lied, his voice cracking. The man didn't buy it, he sat down anyway, setting the bag between them. Don't look fine to me, he said, popping the lid off his coffee. You look like you're running from something, or someone. He took a sip, watching Jake over the rim, not pushing, just waiting. Jake's throat tightened, his fingers digging into his knees. He didn't want to talk, didn't want pity, but the smell from that bag, fries, maybe a burger, hit him like a punch, and his stomach growled loud enough to hear. The man chuckled softly, sliding the bag closer. Go on. I got extra. Jake hesitated, pride warring with need, but need won again. He tore into it, a cheeseburger, still warm, and a heap of fries, salty and crisp. He ate fast, barely chewing, grease smearing his hands, the first real food in days filling the void. The man didn't say anything, just drank his coffee, giving Jake space. When the bag was empty, Jake wiped his mouth, mumbling a rough, thanks. Name's Henry, the man said, leaning back. Been driving this route 30 years. Seen a lot of kids like you, hungry, lost, too stubborn to turn around. He nodded at Jake's backpack, the muddy sneakers. What's your story? Jake shifted, staring at the pavement. Just, needed to get away. Parents, you know. They're all rules and crap. His voice was bitter, but it wavered, the edge dulling. Henry nodded, like he'd heard it before. Ran away myself once. 16, thought I'd make it big out west. Ended up broke in a ditch, till a farmer hauled me home. Worst mistake I ever made, leaving my folks. He paused, his eyes distant, then fixed on Jake. They looking for you? Jake shrugged, but his chest ached. Lisa's texts, asterisk, we love you, Jake. Please come home, asterisk, flashed in his mind, Tom's gruff voice on the phone. Probably, he muttered, kicking a pebble. Doesn't mean I'm going back. Henry set his cup down, leaning forward. You think they don't care, but I'd bet my rig they're tearing Iowa apart right now. Home's where they love you, kid, even when you don't deserve it. He tapped his chest, his voice softening. Bible says, honor your father and mother. Ever hear that one? Jake froze, the words hitting like a slap. Ephesians 6:1-2. Lisa's favorite, the one she'd whisper when he was little, the one he'd thrown back in her face. He nodded, slow, his throat tight. Yeah. My mom says it all the time. She's right, Henry said. Ain't just rules, it's knowing they've got your back. I didn't get that, till I was older, till I saw how much I hurt him by running. You don't want to wait that long. Jake stared at his hands, grease-stained and trembling. The burger sat heavy in his stomach, but it didn't fill the hole, guilt, fear, a longing he couldn't name. He saw Lisa's face, tear-streaked when he'd slammed his door, Tom's fists clenched not in anger but worry. 3 days of hunger, cold, betrayal, and now this, a stranger feeding him, talking sense when he'd expected none. What if they hate me now, he whispered, barely audible. Henry shook his head, pulling a folded bus ticket from his jacket. They don't hate you. They're scared for you. Take it from an old fool, go home. That's where you're strongest, even if you don't feel it yet. He slid the ticket across the bench, Cedar Grove, one way, leaving in an hour. Jake took it, fingers brushing the paper, his breath shaky. Why were you doing this? He asked, looking up. 'Cause someone did it for me once, Henry said, standing. And 'cause you're worth it, even if you don't think so. He tipped his cap, grabbing his coffee. Safe trip, kid. He walked off toward his rig, leaving Jake alone with the ticket and a choice. The truck stop hummed, engines, voices, the clatter of plates from the diner. Jake sat, ticket in hand, staring at the word Cedar Grove. His mind churned, Rico's shove, the alley's shadows, the rain's bite. Then home, the porch light Lisa left on, Tom's truck in the drive, the bed he'd left unmade. Honor your father and mother. It wasn't just a rule, it was a lifeline, one he'd cut and now felt the loss of. He stood, slow, his legs weak but moving. The bus terminal was a short walk, the ticket burning a hole in his pocket. He didn't know what he'd say, sorry, maybe, or nothing at all, but Henry's words stuck, home's where they love you. His third fall had broken him, but the rescue, simple as a burger and a ticket, cracked open a door he hadn't seen before. He wasn't ready to admit defeat, not fully, but he was ready to stop running. The bus pulled up, brakes hissing, and Jake climbed aboard, a small figure against the gray sprawl of I-80. Des Moines faded behind him, and Cedar Grove loomed ahead, not freedom, but something else, something he was starting to need. Hashtag Part 5, The Return, Reconciliation and Wisdom. The bus rumbled along I-80, its engine a steady hum beneath the chatter of passengers and the patter of rain against the windows. Jake Miller sat near the back, his muddy sneakers tapping the floor, the ticket to Cedar Grove clutched in his hand like a lifeline. 3 days ago, he'd skated away from home with fire in his chest, defiance, freedom, a need to prove he didn't need Tom and Lisa's rules. Now, that fire was gone, snuffed out by hunger, betrayal, and fear, replaced by something quieter, heavier, a longing he couldn't shake. Henry's words, homes where they love you, looped in his head, tugging him back to Maple Lane. He didn't know what he'd find there, anger, tears, maybe a slammed door, but he couldn't run anymore. The ride was an hour, the Iowa landscape blurring past, fields, silos, the occasional gas station glowing in the dusk. Jake's stomach churned, not from hunger this time, but nerves. His hoodie still smelled of truck stop grease and alley grime, his hands fidgeting with the ticket's edge. He pictured Lisa's face, soft but stern, always ready with a hug or a verse, and Tom's, gruff and unyielding, his fists clenched when Jake pushed too far. Honor your father and mother, Lisa had said, and he'd thrown it back, hating the weight of it. Now, after 3 falls, cold, betrayal, desperation, it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like truth he'd been too stubborn to see. The bus lurched to a stop at Cedar Grove's tiny station, a single bench under a flickering streetlight. Jake stepped off, the cool evening air hitting his face, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The town was quiet, porch lights winking on, the distant bark of a dog, the familiar hum of home. He started walking, legs shaky but sure, down Main Street, past the corner store, the water tower looming like a sentinel. Maple Lane was 5 blocks away, and each step tightened the knot in his chest. What if they didn't want him back? What if he'd broken something that couldn't mend? He turned the corner, and there it was, 112, Maple Lane, the white siding chipped but sturdy, the porch light glowing like always. Tom's truck sat in the driveway, scratched and mud-splattered, a stack of missing posters taped to the mailbox. Jake Miller, 14, brown hair, last seen, his throat closed up, guilt slamming into him. They hadn't given up, they'd been looking, waiting, tearing themselves apart while he'd been shivering in alleys and stealing chips. He climbed the steps, the wood creaking under his sneakers, and stood at the door. His hand hovered over the knob, trembling, then switched to a knock, soft at first, then harder. Inside, footsteps thumped, a muffled voice, Lisa's, calling, "Tom, someone's here." The door flew open, and there she was, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled, her eyes red and wide. "Jake," she gasped, her voice breaking, and before he could speak, she pulled him into a hug so tight he couldn't breathe. "Mom," he croaked, his face buried in her shoulder, the dam breaking. Tears soaked her shirt, his or hers, he couldn't tell. She sobbed, clutching him like he might vanish again, her hands running over his back, his hair, checking he was real. Tom appeared behind her, his broad frame filling the doorway, his face a storm, relief, anger, fear all at once. "Jake," he said, his voice rough, cracking on the edges. He stepped forward, wrapping his arms around them both, a bare hug that crushed the air from Jake's lungs. "Don't you ever do that again, you hear me?" Tom's words were a growl, but his grip shook, his eyes wet when he pulled back. "I'm sorry," Jake whispered, the words spilling out raw and small. "I'm so sorry." He didn't know where to start, the running, the stealing, the way he'd spat on their love, but they didn't ask. Lisa pulled him inside, shutting the door, and the warmth of the house hit him like a wave, the smell of coffee, the clutter of family, the life he'd left. They sat him on the couch, Lisa fussing with a blanket, Tom pacing like he didn't know what to do with his hands. "Where've you been?" Lisa asked, her voice soft but urgent, tucking the blanket around him. "We've been out of our minds, calling, searching, putting up flyers." Jake stared at his hands, grime under his nails, the story tumbling out in pieces. I just wanted out. Skated to the edge of town, then hitched to Des Moines. Got caught in the rain, lost my board, ran with some guys who screwed me over." His voice cracked, shame burning his cheeks. "I was hungry, cold, tried begging at a truck stop. Thought I could make it, but I couldn't." Tom stopped pacing, sinking into the armchair, his face tight. "You begged?" he asked, low and pained. Jake nodded, eyes on the floor, and Lisa covered her mouth, tears spilling again. "Then this guy, Henry, he gave me food, a bus ticket," Jake went on. "Told me to come home. Said you'd be looking for me, that home's where people love you." He swallowed hard, meeting their eyes for the first time. "I didn't believe him, but I had to see." Lisa reached for his hand, squeezing it. "We never stopped looking, Jake. Every day, police, neighbors, everyone. We love you, no matter what." Her voice trembled, but it held, steady as her grip. Tom leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gruffness softening. "I've been hard on you, too hard, maybe. But it's 'cause I want you safe, strong. When you were gone," he trailed off, rubbing his face, the words stuck. "I thought I'd lost you." Jake's chest ached, a mix of guilt and relief. "I thought you'd hate me," he said, quiet. "For running, for fighting you all the time." "We don't hate you," Lisa said, firm now. "We're mad, sure, scared to death, but hate. Never." She stood, grabbing the Bible from the coffee table, its pages worn from years of use. "Sit with us, okay? Let's talk." They did, right there, the three of them, the room dim but warm. Lisa opened to Ephesians 6, her voice steady as she read, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother," it's one of the 10 Commandments too, Jake. It's not about control. It's about trust, about families sticking together. Jake listened, really listened, the words sinking in differently now. "I hated that verse," he admitted, his voice small. "Felt like you were chaining me down. But out there, alone, with nothing, it wasn't freedom. It was empty." Tom nodded, slow. "I've messed up too, yelling when I should have talked. But we're not perfect, kid. We're just trying to keep you with us." "I get it now," Jake said, his eyes on the page. "Not all of it, but, honoring you, it's not just obeying. It's knowing you're here." He paused, the weight lifting, just a little. "I'm sorry I ran." Lisa hugged him again, softer this time, and Tom clapped his shoulder, a rare smile breaking through. "You're home now," Tom said. "That's what counts." Weeks passed, and Cedar Grove settled back into its rhythm. Jake didn't transform overnight. He still griped about chores, still rolled his eyes at church, but it was different. He helped Tom in the garage, oil smudging his hands as they fixed a carburetor, laughing when Tom swore at a stubborn bolt. He hugged Lisa before bed, her prayers a comfort now, not a nag. His skateboard stayed in the shed, he'd get a new one someday, but for now, he didn't need to ride away. One Sunday, they sat in the third pew at church, Jake between them, fidgeting but present. Pastor John preached on honor, on family, and Jake caught Lisa's eye, a small nod passing between them. After, he lingered on the porch, watching the stars prick the sky, the house humming behind him, Tom's snores, Lisa's radio, the life he'd almost lost. And there it is, Jake Miller's road home, paved with broken pride and mended by a love he couldn't outrun. This is Heartfelt Tales, where we chase the shadows of defiance into the light of grace, where every scar tells a story and every ending begs a question. From a rain-soaked overpass to a Des Moines alley, from a truck stop breakdown to that tear-stained hug on Maple Lane, Jake's tale isn't just a kid's rebellion, it's a mirror for anyone who's ever pushed away the ones who die to pull them back. Ephesians 6 verses 1-2 wasn't just a rule, it was his lifeline, and he found it the hard way. Now it's your turn. What broke you open in this? That first night Jake shivered alone. The sting of Rico's betrayal? Or Henry's burger and wisdom that turned it all around? Spill it in the comments. We're reading, we're listening, we want your take. If this hit your soul, smash that like button, and if you're not with us yet, subscribe and ring that bell. Next time, we're digging into another heart-wrencher you won't shake off. You stayed till the end, you got the whole story, now pass it on to someone who needs to hear it. This is Heartfelt Tales, signing off, but the echo